Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. Those who attended earlier, the panel, well, we found that a pretty stimulating and involved discussion. We hope to have more audience participation for this discussion right now. My name is Elizabeth Halliday with the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council. It's one of the groups co-founded by the Grace Richardson Fund, Andy Sabin Foundation, and Trammell Crow EarthX. We're happy to bring you this sort of think tank roundtable. Few people are still participating, and maybe they've gotten waylaid upstairs in the crowd. So we hope to have a pretty great participation from those here. I'd like to introduce David Nott of Reason Foundation. He's going to say a few remarks and join the panel for a little while, and we hope to be able to hear from all of you. Thank you. David?
Well, thank you. So some of you were here earlier. Some of you are new faces. The first thing I would say is to echo Magatte Wade's point that if we care about the world, we need to promote clean, cheap energy for Africa, because that's the greatest humanitarian impact that we can have. And that's a good way to have the moral high ground. So that's the first point I would make. Second point I would make is that we have a teachable moment coming in Europe, where the collision between European environmental and energy policy with the reality of Ukraine and the disruptions of energy are going to put into focus questions of permitting, fracking, nuclear energy, and resilience in the energy stream. So to Adam's point about, we've been talking about monetary policy for 20 years, but now with inflation, it puts a knife edge on what we've been talking about. I think we have the same thing coming with energy. And then I think the last thing I would add is Reason Foundation in the 1990s was very active in a free market environmentalism movement with PERC and university centers around the United States. And that movement was very long on solutions using property rights to protect species, property rights for conservation, free market concepts. It never got the momentum that the ideas and the solutions deserved, in my estimation. And so I puzzled a lot on that. And I think if Reason were going to reboot free market environmentalism, we wouldn't put the word free market in front of it, because that signals that you're not an environmentalist. It leads with something that allows the person you're talking with to reject you. So to what we all heard at lunch is you have to show that you care. The environmentalism is the objective for any of us who choose to be in the environmental space, a better environment. And then I think one of the things that Rod has done, which is brilliant, is invoking the word clean. Because if we can talk about clean anything, whether it's tax cuts, capitalism, property rights, having clean in front of it and having clean be the first word, that shows the empathy and the sympathy for the objective. And then the method is secondary. And I think that's a brilliant innovation that Rod has had. So just offer that by way of opening remarks.
Thank you very much, David. So I'm Rod Richardson. How many of you were not here for the morning session? So there's a fair amount of folks. So what I think I will do is do a little bit of recap of what we went over in the morning, just for a few minutes. And then what I'm going to do is, this is a roundtable meeting. It's more of a metaphorical roundtable meeting because there's no actual roundtable. But, imagine that you're all, sitting around a roundtable. You can consider me King Arthur if you wish. And you're all going to be offering your points, your point of view about what we're going to be talking about, which is the formation of a coalition of think tanks to craft freedom-based international agreements on many different things. But and why I say many different things is that because it seems to me from my work in climate and the environment and looking for free market solutions there, that the solution to poverty and climate and a lot of war and migration and human trafficking issues and women's liberation and all kinds of things is more freedom. So the freedom is the essential solution that we have to place at the center of our policy, whether it's climate policy or anything else. A lot of people say we need to place women or equality or something like that. Well, if you put freedom at the center, then it makes women at the center, it makes equality at the center, it makes all the good things that you want to have come out of it become at the center, right? Because that's what freedom is all about, empowering people. So, to back up just a little bit about the discussion that we've had, in the Grace Richardson Fund tries to pioneer new free market policy solutions. And, we pointed out, for the benefit of those who weren't here in the morning, we pointed out, starting more publicly in 2016, we said, look, there's been a huge shift that's been going on in the marketplace. Between 2011 and 2015, wind and solar both crossed the line of being cheaper than fossil fuels in the best cited places. And when that happens, it means that the policy that has supported them needs to change. That it's out of date, and what you need to support things that are profitable and competitive is, first of all, you need to let them compete. And number two, the tax rates on those profits are a new policy lever that you can pull. So using supply side tax cuts and open market competition in combination are really powerful policy paradigms that you can put together. However, these things need to be thought through. They need to be innovated because nobody's really thought to apply them this way. It's an innovation in free market environmentalism to think this way. And so in order to think these things through, Grace Richardson Fund went through a process of policy development where we used what's called charrette process, essentially expert working groups of thinkers and scholars to think about these questions and look at what kind of instruments would work. If the problem is, how to open up markets around the world quickly, one of the things that we need to do is think strategically about what historically has worked in the past in terms of opening up markets quickly. And one of the two examples that I raised in the morning were the formation of the United States with the Hamilton Plan offered a carrot for states to sign up with the Constitution, and that carrot was that the federal government would pick up the state debts, and they would become debts of the federal government, which encouraged the states to sign on to the Constitution, and also all the investors in that bad debt suddenly became friends of the United States. So that's an example of a carrot that's used to create a big free market. The other example is the formation of the European Common Market, and the carrot that was used there was Marshall Plan grants. Marshall Plan grants were given out. You had to join the OEEC, the Organization of European Economic Cooperation, which means that you had to sign up for dropping your internal trade barriers, or you're between the countries. So that's another example of using a carrot to convince nations to join a free market. So one of the questions we've asked is, what's a better carrot than government-to-government foreign aid? And possibly you could think about reciprocal supply-side tax cuts. So we discussed in the morning different kinds of instruments that you could use. Though not I only gave one example, which I'll give again, which is the innovation acceleration bond loans and savings accounts. They used to be called clean asset bonds. I actually stepped away from the word clean on the advice of Nick Loris in the back, because clean is apparently a word that turns off some conservatives. Who knew? But and I think he had a point about that. And so we look at we're trying to look at supply side tax cuts that accelerate innovation and that accelerate the opening up of markets. Those are the incentivization. So these are technology neutral tax exempt bonds and loans. and they are something that can be very useful applied to all kinds of technologies. And you're not picking any kind of technology over any other kind of technology. They apply to oil and gas, wind, solar, nuclear, geothermal, everything. What you are applying them to is the projects that employ the best available control technologies in that technology group, right? So you're looking at the negative externalities of oil and gas and coal versus the negative externalities of wind and solar. You're looking at things like hydrocarbon emissions on one hand, but you're also looking at bird kills and your land area and things like that. So you're really not just carbon centric. You're looking at all the negative externalities, because if you only concentrate on carbon, you're going to end up increasing the other negative externalities. So that's the idea, and these can be used in an international context because they're very democratic. Basically, in terms of an international agreement, there would be, you could use these kinds of things in such that any nation that signed up would have to open up their markets, but what they would get in return would be that banks and mutual funds and entrepreneurs could raise this kind of capital on a tax advantage basis in all the participating nations. They would fund their funds and then be able to reinvest and deploy those funds around the world in all the participating nations, right? So you would suddenly have vast international tax advantage capital flows coming to any nation that signed up to the general idea of opening up their markets for these investments. So it's a free market tool. Now, I could say more about these than I did in the morning, but I'll stop the explanation on that there. But I will say one other thing, and that is that there is already an international agreement that is tending in the free market direction on climate. And that is the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade, and Sustainability, which is a agreement between just 6 nations now. It's a free trade agreement for environmentally beneficial goods and services that removes the tariffs on those things. So very good that some climatistas are thinking about free trade and lowering tariffs. Now, the nations involved are New Zealand, Iceland, Costa Rica, Norway, Switzerland, and Fiji. Think tanks, we've been in touch with think tanks from 5 of those nations, who are interested in developing this ACTS agreement into a free ACTS, which would be a more fully free market agreement that incorporates some of these ideas about opening up markets to competition. And in any event, there's a huge opportunity for this kind of thing to, sort of set a gold standard of what a free market environmentalist international agreement should look like, and how it would be, it would be a model that could be incorporated into aspects of, say, the Paris Accord, the Article 6 market mechanism. You say, well, nations could do something like this instead of all the other, government foolishness that is sometimes baked into things like the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act and, the Paris Accord. So, with that kind of background on what we discussed this morning, I'd love to open it up to the floor. We'd love to hear your thoughts on participating in such a coalition. Lorenzo and ATR are interested in helping us, establish this coalition. They have great, experience in doing so. We'd love your thoughts about, what your groups can do to participate and, what opportunities you see either with ACTS or with other agreements, with other issues that maybe not even climate, where a freedom-based agreement could, make a great deal of difference. What are the kinds of things that we should collaborate on? So with that in mind, let us start with Wolf von Laer from Students for Liberty.
Thank you so much, Rod, and thank you also so much for telling me to speak here for for 1 or 2 minutes. So I think this is a very important topic. My name is Wolf von Laer, and I'm the CEO of Students for Liberty. And just recently, we received a $1.5 million grant to just focus on free market environmentalism. And I think it is also of pivotal importance to focus on this, especially because young people really, really care about this. If you look at that, if Gen Z, 70% of them say that they're really anxious about climate change in particular. Boomers, only 40%. So there's a huge gap there. But even more interesting, 31% of every Gen Z state in surveys that they are engaged in climate activism. So they're going out there and doing things. That's a huge number. Like every third Gen Zs that we are always complaining about how lazy they are, right? They're going out there and fighting for these ideas we're talking about right now. So this is a huge opportunity right now, because often the arguments that Rod and like other organizations here pushing forward are not being listened to or not seen at all. We see it mostly like more from a big government perspective. So free market environmentalism might be a misnomer, as David said, so we'll think about that. But I think it's important to push it out there so that there's an alternative to like the more like government heavy-handed approach. And I think how we could add to these efforts, while we don't write policy papers, we are not a think tank, but we have a huge international network. We are active in 113 countries where we are volunteers and also alumni. And they are starting organizations often, 23 of which are now part of the Atlas network, right? And there will be more and more organizations that focus on this. And so we can bring some of these people to the table. Like we have a vice minister in Lithuania right now that is an alumna. And we have think tank leaders, business people, journalists and entrepreneurs. And we would love to bring them to some of these expert meeting groups that you were talking about, Rod, or like some sort of summits, so that the people can actually do something about these ideas we're talking about, can implement that on an international level. And I applaud all the organizations that have paved the way, and we would love to give our people to that effort. And if there's anything that we can do, let us know. So for instance, in Africa, one of the biggest networks of youth journalists is run by Students for Liberty. It's called africaliberty.org. And these people are now like in really influential positions in the media. And they could talk about these things and talk about like good approaches that you're talking about, supply side, which we are like. So just wanted to share that. Thanks so much for the opportunity. And if anybody wants to talk, I'm here. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Wolf. I really appreciate, in fact, could I get a round of applause for Students for Liberty stepping into this space, and in such an impressive way, because, it is great to have, part of the free market education of young people be free market education about climate and the environment, and what are the free market solutions, which are being really missing. But in addition, I wanted to comment on, you mentioned the person who was a SFL graduate in the Lithuanian government. That kind of connection with free market think tanks that have a lot of influence with governments can be huge in promoting the adoption of something like a free acts, because if there's a free market environmentalist agreement, if we can get a few governments buying in and raising their hand and saying, yeah, that's something we want to be a part of, it puts pressure on the rest of the acts nations to say, okay, well, yeah, let's go with it. So so that can be extremely helpful. Does the panel, our co-chairs here, David and Magnus from Iceland, Magatte Wade and Lorenzo Montanari, do any of you want to comment on anything with respect to what Wolf has said?
Definitely, the idea is to start doing kind of an innovation alliance network, kind of a coalition meeting that we need to build the format. We start discussing today, but Student for Liberty is a great example, in which way you build reframe the youth movement on the free market all over the world. So we definitely should work with you together, starting from the 6 countries we're discussing today, Norway, Iceland, New Zealand, Costa Rica. From them, the goal is to reshape the narrative. Because we also think about in which way we need to rethink the green transition in the face of the Ukrainian war. Because we need to think about a new geoeconomic, geopolitics paradigm, how to answer the question in which way we acquire new raw materials, rare earth, in which way we should avoid new dependency from China and Russia again. So this is a very tough challenge, but if we are able to develop with the coalition meeting that we do every month, we can develop a new one around innovation, we can definitely use the experience of all of us, to face what should be the new narrative of free market environmentalism.
John?
Yes. So now John Hart from C3 Solutions has a microphone in his hand, so I assume he wants to say something.
All right. Thanks, Rod. So I'm John Hart. I'm the co-founder of the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions. And we chose to put the words conservative and climate together because we want to win the next generation. And it's a little countercultural still on the right to grab the issue of climate so aggressively. But we're convinced that we have an opportunity as a movement to completely change the narrative and to capture a generation that has been grossly misled and deceived by top-down left-wing authoritarian ideas. And we're seeing this play out right now in real time in Ukraine in a very tragic way. So our organization really has a strategy that I call a three-legged stool of coalitions, communications, and policy. And I'm going to put my colleague Nick Loris on the spot in a minute to talk about the policy side. But on the communication, to underscore the narrative, how vital that is, we've created our own news magazine. We have a publication that exists that Chris writes for it a lot with ACC. A lot of people in this room have contributed to tell the story. A lot has changed about digital media, but what hasn't changed is that stories are still Trojan horses for true ideas. If we can tell a good story and have it be grounded in good policy, communicate that we care, to your point, Magatte, we can begin to change the debate. So I'm going to ask Nick maybe to talk about the free economy's work.
Thanks, John. So Nick Loris, Vice President of Public Policy with C3 Solutions. Our kind of seminal foundational report was called Free Economies or Clean Economies. And all of the principles that we care about, rule of law, private property rights, regulatory efficiency, also happen to be critically important for the environment. And so this study just did a very simple correlation of the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom and Yale's Environmental Performance Index, looked at a bunch of different correlations for these metrics, found a positive correlation, unsurprisingly, because it's wealth that helps people take care of the environment. And I think that is one thing that Magatte touched on in the earlier session today, is that right now the left's strategy on climate is degrowthism and trying to keep people trapped in poverty. The true path forward is decoupling emissions, not degrowthism. It's to allow people to increase their levels of wealth and prosperity so they have the means to take care of the environment. It helps them bend the pollution curve backwards. As they gain more income, they gain more resources to care for the environment, not just to take care of CO2 emissions, but for clean air, for clean drinking water, for all the other traditional environmental pollutants that still plague large parts of our planet, including the United States. And so I think this is the message and the path forward. And there's a number of different policies in which we can continue to increase wealth in the United States, around the world, to turn green premiums into green advantages where cost reductions come down. And it is in the economic interest of developing countries to pursue cleaner technologies, because that's the real end game if you care about climate change. Because the reality is that over 90% of future emissions growth is going to come from developing countries, and rightly so, because they want to grow and prosper. And so the more you can turn those green premiums into green advantages, that's ultimately what's going to allow people to grow, to prosper, to gain levels of wealth, to actually care for their environment. And that's if you care about reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, if you care about increasing resiliency and helping countries adapt to climate change, that's the ultimate path forward. So happy to be part of the discussion and look forward to working with y'all.
So just a sec. I just wanted to comment on what you guys are doing is great, and I also noticed that your website has gotten a lot of reader views. You seem to be republishing articles that have to do with the topic on your website and getting a lot of eyeballs on it. So great job there. One of the key things that think tanks can do as part of this coalition is, as the coalition develops some new good ideas for international agreements that are freedom-based, is to promote them with writing about them, and so pushing it forward, and then maybe even going and walking the halls of power and buttonholing officials, elected officials and appointed officials and trade representatives. You guys up for that? Okay, good. That's what we need. So does anybody else want to comment on anything having to do with that, before we comment on the or do you want to comment on what they're saying?
Sort of.
Yeah, okay, because, okay, good.
Hi, I'm Daniel Reisbeck from the Cato Institute. I work on Latin America, and I think that one issue that's usually absent with these discussions is the lack of property rights, subsoil rights in pretty much the entire world except for the United States. So the way I usually explain it is that if the Beverly Hillbillies had been in Mexico, they would have been expropriated instead of being able to go to Beverly Hills. And I think it's relevant for the for the energy crisis now, because you think how much extra oil and gas would there be out in the market if these countries had more efficient subsoil rights, if you didn't depend on companies like Pemex or Petrobras, or in Colombia, for instance, the current president is banning oil and gas exploration just now due to climate fanaticism. So I would just want to throw that out there. Subsoil rights, I think, is going to be essential, especially in the developing world.
If I may comment, let me just say that I am really glad to see Cato at this discussion. You guys are really impressive, and it's nice to see you, entering into a consideration of these ideas. In the framework that I use, expanding freedom for problem solvers, that includes property rights, because if we don't have property rights, there's no freedom for anyone, right? If everything belongs to the government, you don't have any freedom to do anything. So essentially, property rights are a subset of freedoms, and that's why I lead with it. I don't lead with property rights, but I lead with freedom. But it includes property rights for darn sure, And let me just say, with respect to that, in terms of climate change, the deforestation of the rainforest is almost entirely caused by governments owning far too much rainforest land. And, the inadequate protection of private property rights, or even recognition of them, inadequate rule of law, is leading to a tragedy of the commons. There are perfectly good models for reforestation. In the United States, we have had property rights, and we also introduced, conservation easement tax deductions to make it easier to conserve land. Since those were introduced under Ronald Reagan and, before him, President Ford, since the 1980s, the United States has regrown about 33 million acres of forests on private land. So think about if we used a paradigm like that throughout the rest of the world and bake that into these agreements, what we could do to stop and reverse deforestation globally. It would be quite impressive. But in any event, does anybody else on the panel want to comment on our guests from Cato's remarks?
Go ahead. Quill, go
Well,
ahead, please.
good.
I second.
All in favor. So in any event, Quill, please.
Hi, Rod. Thanks so much for pulling this together. My name is Quill Robinson. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the American Conservation Coalition. If you're not familiar with us, we were founded back in 2017 when being a conservative working on climate was a pretty lonely task, with the mission of giving young conservatives a voice on environmental issues. And in that time, we've grown to be a nationwide organization. We work in over 90 communities, and we have about 10,000 members who are all young conservatives, young libertarians who care deeply about addressing climate change and the environment. And I just wanted to emphasize two things here. I think, first of all, the importance of tackling this issue head on and saying that we as conservatives, as libertarians, as people who believe in freedom, have the better solutions on climate change, and saying climate change explicitly. And I think that's really important because, as it was pointed out, this is something that matters a heck of a lot to young people, but also the moment that we're in right now. We were just, Chris, my colleague, and I were just over in Sharm el-Sheikh with our friend Senator Fareed over here from Egypt, and we convened a whole bunch of politicians from around the world who come from the right side of the aisle to talk about climate solutions. And it was so clear that not just in the United States, but all over the world, there's an urgent need for free market-based policies to tackle this issue. And there's a hunger for that. And a lot of the folks on the left have not wrestled with the fact that these top-down big government policies are actually inhibiting economic prosperity and energy access, but also emissions reductions. Just one stat that I'll put out there is the IRA, with the IRA, 90% of the emissions reductions potential of it will be eliminated if the status quo on permitting remains. So that's just the sort of thing that we can go out there and say that we as conservatives, as libertarians, our values are the ones that are actually going to lead to serious decarbonization. And so I think the moment is very ripe for all of us in this room, and I'm so glad that we have a room full of people who are interested in this, because it's certainly gotten a lot bigger. And then just last thing I'll add, on that education point, we have a resource called the Market Environmentalism Academy that my colleague Chris here put together, which is really the go-to resource for young people who are looking to learn about free market solutions. So we just want to offer that up, and then also our friendship and partnership to any of you who are interested in getting in this fight.
So can we count on you to be in this coalition?
Of course.
Yes, Marcin, formerly from the BCA, or are you
Yes.
still with the BCA?
BCA is still them, so supporting them similarly to Chris, but BCA is on its own.
Yeah, right.
So thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure to see you all and see so many different organizations from the liberty movement, widely understood, caring about environment. We are about 50 years behind the big government approach to that. They have a huge leg up on us in terms of the popularity of their solutions to the environmental question. And that means that we have to be innovative, which luckily we are pretty good at, given that we are for competition. And I think the ACC is a great example of what you can do in this niche, how you can show that, hey, it's not only the left that cares about the environment. And so I think we should really utilize the kind of resources that we have as all of the different organizations. We have some of the brightest minds in terms of the, especially the economics, the political science, and figuring out solutions to problems. We tend to keep the solutions to ourselves, unfortunately. But I think with actually setting up these networks, this wonderful network that you are proposing, I think we have a shot at improving that. And I think what's going to be especially crucial here, and what was sort of mentioned already, but I think we should really get at, is the importance of this being a global movement. And the fact that the problems in different countries and the individual situations require solutions that will be applicable. So for example, as we talked about Iceland, you can't just put the geothermal plants in place that has no geothermal energy. And an important role in this are the people on the ground, as what you're talking about with Africa. As we have seen in other places, we have to have people talking about it from these places. We have to provide them with resources, work with them to utilize their power on the ground to get stuff done. And through the works of SFL and through other organizations across the world, we have to learn how to do that, what kind of policies can work with each other to adopt them to these specific places, localize them, bring actual solutions. And we can always talk about the semantics, whether we like the word clean or not. But most of the time, it's just going to work depending on the individual situation. And different thing is going to work in Nigeria, different thing is going to work in Australia. And the importance of these kind of networks is figuring that out and localizing it.
Any thoughts?
I think for me, in general, the same thing keeps coming back again. And we might have the best solutions in the room right now, and that's why I'm committed to working with you all. But again, the missing party, there are missing people in this room. And there are the people who can really take. We have one first battle to win, which is the battle of even why should anybody listen to us? All I hear is we have the right solutions. They're not the only ones who care. I don't know. I'm hearing too much fighting and just like. So I would like to see us partner with people who might not come from the brain side, but for us to be serious about, also taking here people who are really good at communication. Does anybody here know this woman by the name of Isabel? Her last name always escapes me, but she did give a TED talk on the need for nuclear. I mean, Isabel and her work really got to the place where California decided not to kill the Diablo nuclear plant. And you know how she did it? She knows what she knows. She's got her facts straight. But then she would be just like, she's an ex-model from Brazil. And then she would do all of these tutorials on, YouTube. And in the middle of YouTube, she stops like, stop everything. Do you guys know why nuclear matters? And that's how she got all of these people to really care. But behind the scene, she worked with another friend of mine on actually the exact policy she needed. So on the front end, we had this figurehead who could push, and behind the scene, everybody was getting the work was being done already. Another friend of mine who write policies and everything, they wrote everything, and then eventually they got this real thing passed. So my point is, this whole the mind, and again, I know I sound like a broken record, and I sound almost like irrespective of what you guys all bring to the table, but it's because I care so much about what you bring to the table, I would like to not see it go to waste. So I would like, but the only way I'll stay in this coalition, so I'm going to threaten you right now, is if you make a commitment that you also, for every single think tank we have doing, think tank work, that we're also going to seek somebody on the other side of the aisle in terms of messaging, marketing, promotion. Otherwise, I'm telling you, 50 years from now, we'll still be talking about this. So I really would like for us to also, when we have these meetings, to talk about who is it that we can think about, and they're there. They're willing to go with us. So this partnership has to happen. So I would love for us to have that happening, and then I promise you I'll stay in the coalition. If not, I don't want to be part of a group where we only talk about ideas, which are great, but then we see our asses kicked by the other side, who on top of that is sitting on nothing real, only on fumes. So I will put that challenge out to all of us. That next time I would like to see more women. I would like to see, there are some young people here, but representation matters. It's not about DEI crap, but seriously.
Thank you very much.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's one big danger of being in the freedom movement, and that is that, we're all, many of us are fans of Ayn Rand, and we're fans of the idea of freedom. But how much is that like being in a Game of Thrones fan club where you're interested in a fantasy of a world versus actually being, willing to get out there and do the work to make the world you want happen? So I think that talks to the point. We don't just want to be in a Game of Thrones fan club about liberty. We're liberty fans, but not actually making it happen. So let's talk about that. So we have a gentleman over here. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Özgür. I'm from Turkey, and actually I was like a very typical environmentalist before, and then I had the chance to attend to UNFCCC conference in Bonn in 2016. And at there I saw that there are those people basically gathering and talking about climate, but they are using the excuse of climate change in order to implement their own agenda on, let's say, identity politics, left-wing politics, redistribution, and so on. For example, there was a side event about technology, and there were literally 2 participants for that, while there is like a cultural thing. It was like filled with 300 people. And at that point, I noticed that in the classical sense, climate activism doesn't care about the climate much. And then I started to think about this on my own perspective, and I saw that even with a Rothbardian perspective, you can defend some climate, let's say, regulations or things like that. So I think this is a very important issue, and since we love to swim against the tides, this is not the case. Sadly, most of the people are care about the climate. This is why we are, with my friend and partner Israfil, we have started a free market environmentalist policy making center for the Freedom Research Association. We have been working it for like a couple of months, and we have interns and so on. And also we have a very strong communication team. We are on the social media and we are on the national media, but not on this topic because we are having a difficulty about it. So when it comes to regulations against the alcohol bans on, when it comes to economic policies, and when it comes to, let's say, freedom of speech and so on, there are like centralized knowledge bases. There are places that we can take examples, but for free market environmentalism, I think we are having difficulties in order to find a model, find a role model or any like draft or something like that. So this is why actually I choose to attend this section, because I really need your help on this. I'm not just saying that we should go in this together, but I will try to talk to everybody who is working on this topic, and I would like to ask for resources, reports, papers, whatever that we can read, consume, and translate into Turkish, and we will use it in our campaigns as well, because we already managed to change Turkish people's mind on alcohol consumption and some other things as well. So as a, I think, very successful think tank based in Turkey, as a Freedom Research Association, we really can make that change happen. And we are already have this strength in communication, but we need just the theory and the support from our international partners on that.
Thanks very much.
That's I really appreciate that. And, if you can be part of this coalition, you will hear lots of ideas about, environmental policies, and certainly let's connect, and I'll share stuff with you. There are other people in this room that you should connect with as well, like our gentleman from PERC back there. Maybe you can say a little bit about their program. There are different flavors of free market environmentalism. Grace Richardson Fund, it really looks at policy innovation in this area. So we're talking about things that are, really, a little bit very new ideas in the field. PERC has been around for a long, long time and has, really established what the core of free market environmentalism is all about. I actually, personal story, I actually was on the grants board of the Smith Richardson Foundation when we approved our first grants to PERC, and I actively championed for those grants because I thought it was a very important. That goes back to the 1980s, so
Great.
Long time. But
I believe over here at Avocado, Dr. Palmer called out this organization. I believe he might have to
okay, so
say
you
a few
guys are
words.
going to win the Templeton Award, says Dr. Palmer. Okay, let's hear what do you guys got to say.
My name is Dhananath. I'm from Sri Lanka, representing Advocate Institute. I feel in my parts of the world, the thought leadership on climate change and how the free market movement can respond to these changes has been slightly absent. I think that's something we have to actively work on, because one of the success stories why Advocata was able to move this forward and to bring the narrative was there was thought leadership and there was material available. There was always relevant conversations in the freedom movement. We can always quickly pick up and respond. And we are, I think it's no secret, like countries like us, which is an island, tiny little island, we call ourselves, we are not even a dot in the map, and Singapore and Maldives, we are in a situation where the success rate has to be 100% on this climate issue because we are so sensitive for the climate issues. And I think in our side, it's basically the other side slightly has taken, at the moment, the advantage. So I think we have to, through the coalition, availability of material and looking at an overall strategy would be worthwhile to invest and consider, because it is the ecosystem that we built. Of course, the coalition is one brilliant idea because that's how you build the networking ecosystem to drive the movement forward. But actively doing it would be really helpful for us, because for the moment we are looking at deregulation or regulatory barriers for green movement, like the environmental innovations to take place. What are the regulatory barriers? And we are thinking to cut it out in Sri Lanka. But I think there are so many other things that can be done, and it would be really helpful for us.
So we've heard about the farmers rioting in Sri Lanka, which is essentially the nitrogen. My superficial understanding is the Greens said that the nitrogen is terrible and we need to not. Can you educate me about that debate, the discussion, the opportunity? I'd like to know more.
Absolutely. I'm a little, I would say, not shameful, but it is very difficult to explain I'll explain the sentiment, what drove to that decision, but it is completely irrational and mythological. So there was these people who were close to the decision makers said that there was a kidney disease spreading in the central parts of the island, which is the agricultural area, which was identified as CKDU, that is the unknown kidney disease, because the source wasn't known. And there was people who were closer to these decision makers said there was a god came and said that because of the cadmium content of the fertilizer and the nitrogen content is what is causing this kidney disease. And to fuel that up, we had a sort of a free or subsidized fertilizer scheme where the farmers get at a very concessional rate fertilizer. So of course, when you get at concessional rate, we all know they try to overuse it, which again washed away to the water sources, and probably when they drink it, of course there can be a impact. But still, it wasn't found out by any research under any university, like top universities they evaluated, it wasn't found out. They assume the fluoride content is higher in that region. That's what causing probably the kidney disease. So, but it became a very sensitive and an emotional issue because it was narrated in a way that because of this fertilizer is what's causing people to die from kidney disease. So and after some time, this god's mythology has been forgotten, and it was established that the fertilizer has been the main cause for the kidney disease. And we, Advocata, we got the one of the world-renowned Sri Lankan agricultural economic specialist called Dr. Pethiagoda, I think, if I remember right. He was the winner for the Lennon Award, if I remember right, which is considered the Nobel Prize sort of the thing in the environmental world. So he categorically denied, like he said, no, it's not the cause. That's the only contribution that we could do. But that was the narrative that was driven. What you need to understand is in other parts of the world, like India, Sri Lanka, probably about 25 to 50% is below the poverty line. And they are in this superstitious mentality, which can be easily directed in a different direction, which could affect everyone. And that's what exactly happened. And even later on the TV discussions, it found out even those who promoted those who promoted on this kidney issue wasn't aware how the soil was built, because those who know the soil content, they know it was coming from the mother soil bed. It was not on the other way around. So that is what happened in my country. I hope it was adequate.
Thanks. Over here, Faroud also, and Chris Barnard has a comment.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Farid. I have two hats. One of them is co-founder of the Liberal Club of Cairo. The other one that I'm a senator in the Egyptian Senate. And let me give you a couple of things that we have been doing. The very first proposal I've been done during my term in the Senate, which is 2 years now, was reform something called the Yeah, the Supreme Council of Energy. It's a board. It's been established in 1960s in Egypt until now, and it's just a governmental body that approves and set the energy strategy without any representation of the private sector or whoever independent experts or any representation for the stakeholders. So our very first bill, and it was developed by the Liberal Club, we passed it. We were able to pass it after 8 months of work, in the Senate, forth and come, and we were able to restructure this board and put some independent experts to be there when they are discussing and approving the energy strategies. So this is one of the things that I'd like to talk about, because it shows that there is always a chance that you can inject some reforms in even very strict governmental environment. Other than that, one of the things that we also worked on, and we find there is a great opportunity for it, that Egypt and the EU has a free trade agreement. It started in 2004. In 2004, the bilateral trade amount was less than $10 billion. It was about $8 or $9 billion. In 5 years, it was doubled to reach almost $20 billion. So this is a very good proof that trade works, free trade works, and it benefits both sides. The Egyptian exports to the EU increased substantially. The standards of living of the people had increased substantially, and it's not about only the measurement of poverty, but it's about the quality of life itself. So you can find even the poorer people got better appliances, got newer cars, better access to technology. So this is how the free trade works. We can talk volumes about the beauty of the free trade and the importance of the freedom and liberty, but when you put it in motion, when you put it in action, and by the way, one of the hashtags we use constantly is liberty in motion. So whenever we did something, we put hashtag liberty in motion. So again, this proves how the free trade works, how the market systems works. And this is a tremendous success, when you put both parties. Because again, we still do have problems, because when you put regulations, environmental regulations, even if you have a free trade framework, when it comes to the investments, for example, recently the EU has changed that, but before that they used to say that the investments in the natural gas is not green enough for them. They don't believe that the natural gas is green enough, though we still believe that it's important as a transition fuel. It's important as it's a natural resource that been locked for developing countries, so we have to benefit from it. So this is one of the issues that I believe we need to think about when we're talking about putting a framework together, for free trade or creating incentives and so on. Finally, when it comes also to the geopolitics of the energy. The current wave of turning into renewable energy, it's important, but still it puts us under the thumbs of authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, and therefore innovation is very important, and therefore also trying to unlock the potential of different types of innovation in the energy mix. This is also an important thing. So I guess this is also one of the things that we need to think about. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right. Faroud, I really appreciate your input here. And yes, those kinds of considerations would, of course, be taken into consideration in the coalition, especially if you participate and raise those concerns, because it will be a fully democratic sort of process.
Participate in whichever way possible.
Yeah. So anyway, please, Chris.
I'm a Students for Liberty alum, and I founded the British Conservation Alliance in the UK out of Students for Liberty, which is one of those think tanks that was born out of the network. And now I work with Quill at the American Conservation Coalition in DC as a policy director. And Quill kind of excellently laid out the work that we've been doing, but I just wanted to offer two quick thoughts. The first is a statistic that we released from a poll earlier this year, which was really quite worrying to us, which is that 54% of young Republicans in the US. So over half of young Republicans believe that the Green New Deal is an effective way to tackle climate change. And so these are self-professed conservatives believing that. For the non-Americans in the room, the Green New Deal is a $100 trillion top-down approach to climate change that would really not even tackle climate change, but also be disastrous for our countries. But the reason that so many young people, even on the right in the US, believe that the Green New Deal is a solution to tackling this is because it's the only solution they've been offered for so long. And that leads me into my second point, which is libertarians, conservatives tend to be very good at leading with facts and knowledge, owning the libs on whatever they're saying wrong about whatever issue. But exactly to your point, the problem there is that when we tell young people that actually the Green New Deal wouldn't work because of this, this, and this, they don't hear the facts and reason behind that. They just hear, you don't care. And what we need to do as a movement is we need to lead with why we care first, not with why they're wrong or why our solutions are better. It's we care about nature because I hike national parks and I love national parks. Quill loves nature because he loves fishing. He's a fly fisherman. Rupert from PERC, they're really good at showing why they care because they hunt and they ski. And we need to show our personal connection to this issue before we then have the credibility to step into the issues and the solutions that we have to this problem. So my challenge really to everyone here is to think about what is your personal connection to this issue beyond saying that the other side is wrong. And if you find that personal issue, if you communicate that in a good way, then we have the credibility to sit at the table and to actually have our voices heard. So that really is my challenge to this room. And thank you all for really being a part of this because it's what we've been working on for years now. And so it's really exciting to see so many of you join us now.
And thank you so much. I just wanted to say that when you actually speak from that place of what it is that you care about, because it's your lived experience, you become invincible. You have the credibility that people can hear in your voice. It comes out of every pore of your skin. It is just, what do I say? Yeah, contagious. It's contagious.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I caught that.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. I'm Diego. I'm with For Regulación Inteligente, a think tank based in Spain. We're up for the Freedom Award today. I think we got Magatte's support today, so let's see what happens. But anyway, so my struggle with this issue has been that we have very good indicators in Spain. We do. We rank top 7, I think it's on the Yale index. And if you check, for example, for CO2 or particles emissions, we've cut them by 30, 40%, even in the larger capitals, which normally have much more polluted environments, okay? So to me, that was a big issue. I always wanted to delve into these topics, but couldn't quite find it as easy because, you know, thank God, the results are good. We're performing well in terms of the environment, but you should always aspire for more. And one of the things we did is look into the city of Madrid, what was causing the pollution that's still there, okay? And one thing we found, and just wanted to share that story with all of you, is that 30% of all the emissions came from the public transport system. So then we took a look into how can you actually save those emissions. Can you cut them? Is there technology? Of course there is. We have technology to run buses without resorting to less clean alternatives and technologies. So then we looked at the cost. The cost was 100 million per year if you funded it in 4 years, which is nothing. Okay, we're talking about 1% of the annual budget of the council. We run the numbers, we publish these articles and reports, we push for this campaign, and you know what? Things are getting done. They're renewing the public transportation system. It will be completely clean in 4 or 5 years. And to me, this is one example of why it's important to move past the general rhetoric and to try and get something, you know, get this message out there and get people to understand, hey, we can cut this 30% in just 5 years with 1% of your annual budget. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I don't know if, because in some countries, numbers are pretty worrying, but I believe some of you in the panel come from countries where the numbers are good, where the emissions have been going down. And so what's maybe, I would love to get 1-2 comments on that. What do you do when the numbers are actually good, besides maybe trying to find potential victories like we did with the buses in Madrid, which seems like a small thing, but.
Let me just point out a situation where the emissions are good, and there's a lot they could do with free market policy. So Iceland, for instance, has almost zero emissions because they've got this geothermal and hydro, but it's a 93% owned power sector, 93 government owned. So the point is that they're in a perfect position to develop the next generation of zero emission fuels using that geothermal, makes electrolysis cheaper, et cetera. But they're never going to get there with 93% government ownership because they need competition to develop the technologies and the business models to get to the next level. So that's a really good example of why, even if you have perfect emissions, a free market model is better because it'll produce more future progress for you. So we don't have a lot of.
No, actually, this is just about out. It was Magnus.
We're going to go to Patrick, but.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah. So hi everyone, Patrick Mardini from Lebanon. I think what you guys are doing is a great initiative, and kudos really. And I think that your initiative is very relevant for developing countries, because in developed countries you already have 24 hours of electricity. If you look at Africa, if you look at most of Asia, parts of Latin America, they have something we call electricity poverty. In Lebanon, we don't have electricity. We have 22 hours of blackouts per day, right? So if you if we look at the problem from this angle, let's compare the renewable energy with the traditional energy. In the renewable energy, if we do a solar farm in Lebanon, for example, the cost of producing electricity over the life cycle of the system is around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. The government electricity produces electricity at 50 cents per kilowatt hour, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that in developing countries, because of the inefficiencies of the government, renewable energy is much more profitable. It makes sense. It has an economic sense. So why government don't do it? Well, because they want to maintain their monopoly because of the entrenched cronyism. And here where we go to your initiative, because like if you take Lebanon, in the constitution of Lebanon, there is this order of things. So if we sign an international treaty, it actually is it is actually more important than the local law. So respecting those international treaties come first. If they contradict with the law, you go with the international treaty. So if Lebanon managed to sign an international treaty, for instance, saying that we need to allow solar entrepreneurs to sell their electricity to the public, even if the local law does not allow for it, well, it will be possible to do it because those international or treaties are bounding actually. And so that would be a very interesting way to unleash entrepreneurship in the energy sector in places where it makes economic sense, it's profitable, and it solves a problem for the population, which is electricity poverty, right? So you have everything that comes up together. So you don't need to fight over, oh yeah, what is cheaper, fuel or solar? Well, in Lebanon, solar is cheaper, right? That's how you can gain the moral high ground, right? Because you are tackling a problem of poverty in poor countries, and you are saying renewables is the solution, and you are saying, guys, if you sign this treaty, you will solve the problem for those developing countries. So you need to do it for the poor, right? And so, and that's why I think that this approach is really interesting, and I thank you for it.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I think your remarks are spot on. And that's the entire idea of what we're trying to do, and that is that these power sectors, like the one in Lebanon, are a dead stop to development. So if you don't have power to plug into, you can't develop anything, right? No women's liberation, and all kinds of other problems. So if we can wrap free markets with a green cloak of, this is actually a climate solution too, I think we can develop a global momentum for this kind of solution. And as you say, it really flips the script in these countries in a kind of immediate way. Any other comments on what Patrick has to say?
That's great. Thank you very much. I'd love to thank all of you for your excellent questions and participation and being here. We know that the Atlas events are very exciting. David Nott, Reason Foundation, Magatte Wade, African Center for Prosperity. Rod Richardson and Lorenzo Montanari from Americans for Tax Reform. We'll circulate the video. We'll certainly ask for your input if you have a particular issue you'd like to work on and see what we come up with for step 2. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you later.